have one of our front band pieces. There are two of these. And what the pattern tells you is to fold in the seam allowance on the unnotched end. So as you can see, this is the notch end right here. So you're going to be folding in the seam allowance on the unnotched side. Now what I like to do is take my long ruler and just mark out my 5/8 inch seam allowance, because that's what this is. And I just do that for a cleaner fold. You don't have to do this. You can eyeball your 5/8 if you want to. You can do a basting stitch at 5/8 inch and fold. You can mark this. Let's see, what else is there? You could, let's see, I think I went out a little too far. I just like to mark it because it gives me a clean fold line. So you're going to fold in the unnotched end, the unnotched side at 5/8 inch, and then you're going to trim this down to 3/8 inch. All right, so when you fold it, it's going to look like this. Okay, and then I'm going to go, and because I have my serger, I'm going to trim this down so that it's 3/8 inch. You can take your pinking shears and pink it down to 3/8 inch. But this is what you're doing. Folding that seam allowance in on the unnotched edge, and then trimming that seam down to 3/8 inch. I'll be back. Okay, so this is what I have. That's my fold I made at 5/8 inch. I turned it over and pressed, and then I trimmed it down to 3/8 inch using my serger. Again, if you don't have a serger, just use your pinking shears to trim that down. Okay, now we are going to take our shirt, and on one side we are going to attach that front band matching up our notches. So you should have a notch here on the front, and so you're going to take the raw edge of one band, match up the notches, and pin. Okay, you're going to pin all the way down, so it's going to look like this. Okay, and so this is the tail end of my shirt. So you're going to pin all the way down, and you're going to stitch, coming out of frame here, you're going to stitch from start to finish, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And you're going to do this on both sides. So you're going to have a front band on the left side of your shirt, and you're going to have a front band on the right side of your shirt. Okay, so I've attached the front band. As you can see here, this is what it looks like from the inside. I'm going to trim this seam allowance down, and then I am going to press the band outward. All right, so this is what it looks like from the inside. Trim the seam down, press towards the band, and then we'll be back to continue on. Okay, I got a little ahead of myself and forgot to hit the record button. So this was our front band that we attached. Let me go from the other direction, since I think that's how I ended. So this was our front band that we attached it. I trimmed down my seam allowance, my serger. I pressed it out. Okay, so then what I did was I folded the front band in half along the fold line. If you look at your pattern piece, you'll see that there's a fold line. And essentially what that fold line is remember that first turn we did of the seam allowance on the band on the unnotched edge. So that's this folded in. Okay, now we have it attached. So that fold line actually is creating a fold that's going to allow you to cover up this seam. That's what that fold line is going to do. So what I did is I went ahead and I folded along my fold line and I gave it a nice press. Again, I cannot stress how important pressing is in sewing. If you skip a lot of the pressing steps, you'll have a hard time, you know, joining pieces, getting things to lay nicely. Do not skip the pressing. It is very, very important. So I did my fold, created my fold line, okay? And then what I did was I came back down to the bottom and I folded the fold line back on itself, okay? And I stitched across just the front band with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And then I came in and I trimmed it away. And what that does is it's gonna create a clean hem seam. That's what that's gonna do. So when I turn this out, okay, go in here, my little point turner, it's gonna give me almost an automatic clean hemline. Okay, so once you do that, what I like to do, and it's just kind of ease of processes. So I pin this down because I am going to go and do a base stitch to hold it in place. But for right now, I'm going to pin it because I'm going to move on to the collar. So all I'm doing is just pinning this in place to keep it folded until I baste it down. You can go and baste yours right now, and if you'd like, it's no big deal. I'm just not going to because I'm gonna move on to another life. You could not pin it and leave it open, but sometimes, you know, that nice press you have in there kind of works its way out when you leave it free falling. So I'm just pinning this up. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is put this out of the way. I'm actually going to do my basting. And when I baste, I'm just going to be basting along this end right here to hold this in place temporarily. Same purpose that the pins are serving. I'm going to do that when I go to sit down to stitch the collar. Okay, so what we have is our collar. And if you remember, our collar was 2 pieces. Okay, you are going to take those 2 pieces and put them right sides together. Okay, you're going to start stitching at the dot. You should have 2 dot markings. You're going to start stitching at the dot, leaving the top portion open, but you're going to be stitching all the way around, leaving the top portion open. So when I go to sit at my machine, make sure I'm telling you this right. When I go and sit at my machine, I am going to start stitching here at 5/8 inch, come down, make my pivot, continue for 5/8 inch, make my pivot, and continue up at 5/8 inch and back stitch. So I'm going to start here back stitching, come all the way around, stop here and back stitch. So my top is going to be open. Be right back. Okay, so here's what we have. Our collar all stitched and our top is open. So I'm going to go and I'm going to trim down my seam allowance. And then I'm going to turn my collar right side out. Okay. Okay, I want to show you what I did here. So, you know, of course it was on the wrong side. So I went over to the ironing table and I pressed the seam, you know, to one side. Okay, now what I'm going to do, and I turned it out, I poked my corners out. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do understitching again. We talked about this earlier, and it is not something the pattern tells you to do, but I feel like it should be done. So I am going to go and understitch, and basically that's stitching in the ditch. And remember how I said I like my edge stitch foot because of that. So we're just going to go and understitch the collar, and you're going to go as far as you can. You don't have to, you know, try to get in here at this corner and get all the way to the other corner. Just, you know, kind of start and stop as far into the collar as you can. Okay, so now I've understitched. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and give this a nice press. And then I am going to top stitch all the way around and baste the open and close. So I'm going to top stitch, and remember, top stitch is at least a 3 millimeter stitch length, about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 in from your seam. And then I'm going to baste stitch this bottom part close. Okay, so now I've top stitched and basted my raw edge open and close. So now I'm going to grab my uninterfaced collar band, and we are going to turn the seam allowance up 5/8 inch on the unnotched edge. And guess what I forgot to do, guys? At least I think I did. I did not make my notches. Remember I said that it is very important to make your markings. So what I'm going to do is figure out what I do with my pattern pieces, and I probably put them back. Nope, here they are. So I also keep my pattern pieces nearby for this very reason, but I did forget to make my notches. So I'm going to go here and make my notches in my other markings that belong on this collar band. Okay, so what you have is on your uninterfaced collar band, you're going to turn up the seam allowance on the single notched edge. So you have a double notch side and you have a single notch side. You're going to turn up the seam allowance on the single notched end, and then, like we've been doing, you're going to trim the seam allowance down to 3/8 of an inch. Okay, on this next step, the pattern has you do it in 2 parts. Do it in 2 parts if you are more comfortable doing it that way. I personally will not do it in 2 steps. I will do it in 1. So what you're going to do, and because I interfaced both pieces of my collar, it doesn't really matter which side that I'm putting it on. But I'm going to match up the notches on my collar band with my collar, and I'm going to pin. Now what the pattern has you do is baste this in place. Again, I'm going to do this in 1 step. So I'm going to take my interfaced collar band and I'm going to sandwich my collar in between the 2 bands. Okay, so I'm going to find my double notch again, and I'm going to be matching up my notches. So I'll have 3 layers, 2 collar bands and my collar is sandwiched in between my collar bands, and I'm going to pin all raw edges even. Again, the pattern has you do this in 2 steps. It has you attach one collar band and base stitch, and then it has you attach the other collar band and do your permanent stitching. I'm going to do this all in 1 step because I'm comfortable with it. If you are not, please, please, please do it in the 2 steps. You gotta do what works best for you. I am a firm believer in that, and what may be easy for one is not quite that simple for the other. So you do what works best for you and what you're most comfortable with. Okay. Okay, what I've done is I have stitched from the large circle on one side through all layers all around to the other side at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. You will have to work into the curves, just take your time, okay? So now I'm going to trim this down, and I am going to turn it right side out, and then we're going to be doing some understitching again, and I will show that to you. Okay, so this is what we have. Turned right side out is our collar. So this is our collar. This is one side of our collar band, and this is the side that we turned under and trimmed. So what we're going to be doing now is I am going to do some understitching here. Also, you could do some top stitching, but I'm going to do some understitching right here along the seam between the collar band and the collar. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take this free end here of our collar and we're going to attach it to the neckline of our shirt. So that's what's up next. Okay, so here's my shirt. Now, the pattern, I believe, tells you you can make little snips in the neckline and the curve just to kind of get it to lay with you as you attach the collar. I found because of the cotton that I'm using, I don't have to necessarily do that. Also, you probably should stay stitch the neckline. I'm personally just not going to because I'm being lazy. But now we're going to attach our collar band to the neck of our shirt. Now, remember I said how markings were very important. So here you see these are 2 dots. In your pattern piece, they're 2 triangles. So those 2 triangles are going to match up with your shoulder seams. That's where the placement's going to be. Okay, and then you have a notch on this end and you have a notch on this end, and that should match up with the notch that you have in your left and right front. All right, so again, your triangles are going to go at your shoulder seams, and then you're going to match your notches up on your front. So I am going to trim some of this away because it should be flushed. I was just overhang interfacing. So I have my notch here that I'm going to match up. Okay, I have my notch on this side that I'm going to match up. Okay, and then I have my triangle, my dot. Remember how I showed you guys how to match up the seams for that? Okay, then I have my other side that needs to be matched up. Okay. And then I'm going to work my way around pinning. Just work your way around pinning. I'll show you what all the pinning looks like when we get done and where we're going to stitch. So this is what our collar looks like, all pinned to our shirt, and we're going to go and we are going to stitch this down. Your dots on the end should end at the end of your shirt. All right, so we're going to stitch using a 5/8 inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and the end, and we are getting to the finish line, believe it or not. Okay, this is what we have stitching the collar to our neck of our shirt. What I want you to do is make sure that you don't catch this other interfacing in there. The first two versions of this shirt that I made, I was conscious of it and didn't do it. This time I did, and because I'm tired and just not paying attention. But do not stitch the other collar band down. You want that out of the way. You're just stitching this extended portion to the neck of the shirt. Okay, so then you're going to trim this seam allowance down. Again, I'm going to use my serge. If you have pinking shears, use your pinking shears. Or if you just have regular scissors at this point, you could use that too, because this is going to cover it up. And to be honest, I honestly have never had anything come apart. I've been sewing for about 5 years now, and I have plenty garments that I've made using pinking shears, and I don't take any extra care when washing my clothing. So anywho, go trim the seam allowance down, and then we will come back and turn this all outside. And again, we are almost there. Okay, so what I've done is I've pressed that seam up. I've pressed it up, and then I've taken my other collar band that we turned under and up, and I'm folding it over to cover that seam line. Now, I like to use these heat resistant pins to pin it down, and then go give it a nice good press again before I stitch it down. And just because sometimes I needed to sit and let me think through life before I go stitching through this thing and goofing something up, especially when I sew after I have already worked all day long. So, but I do love sewing, so that's why I come right in and get to it if I don't have anything of any major importance going on, because I just like it. It's relaxing, and I can tell when I'm tired and need to stop, because I'll start making silly mistakes. Sometimes the same one 3 times, and then it's like, okay, really, stop, girl. So I just like to pin this down, and then I'll go and press it again. But this is what the inside of my shirt is going to look like. And so when I get done and I press that collar down, this is what we'll have. It'll sort of start really looking like a shirt. So okay, so remember that turn that we did, and I said it was going to make your hem easier to turn up. So what I'm going to do now is go and turn my hem all the way up and give it a press. so that we can stitch that down. So all that's left to do now is to make our buttonhole markings and sew on our buttons. So all I do is I take my pattern piece and I overlay it on my shirt. And really you're supposed to make the buttonhole markings before you stitch everything together, but I personally don't like making my buttonhole marks until afterwards in case there's any alterations I have to do, things get thrown off, all of that. So these hash marks here are the markings for the buttonhole. So this is where your button is supposed to start, your buttonhole is supposed to start, this is where it's supposed to end. So I'm just going to go and put a little pin in here and just mark my starting points for my buttons. And then I'm going to use my machine to make my buttonholes and sew my buttons on, and I'm done. So I've made my buttonholes. As you can see, I've trimmed away my thread. So now I'm going to take my freight check. Remember I said we need a freight check. And I'm going to just put some across the buttonholes, the front and the back, and let that kind of dry before I actually cut my buttonholes. So we're just putting freight check on the front. I also put it on the back. And what that's going to do is stop my fabric from fraying when I cut the holes. Alright, remember I said you don't have to have this 8mm rotary cutter because you can use your seam ripper to cut your buttonhole open. So what I do is I take a pin and stick at the top of my buttonhole before the start of the hole, so right underneath the start of the hole. And then I also do the same for the bottom, and this is to put that pin there to block me from cutting up through the buttonhole. And yes, I have cut through buttonholes before with the seam ripper, which is why I do not like using it, but it can be done. So, and I'm at an awkward angle here behind my camera. So I'm going to take my seam ripper. Make sure you have a sharp seam ripper. You don't want anything that's dull and that's going to fight you as you try to cut through the fabric. So you're just going to take your seam ripper, pierce through the fabric, and gently cut up. And see, that pin stops you. And I'm not putting any extreme force on this. Do not do that. All right. So then I have my buttonhole open. All right. So what I'd like to do is I use my trusty little rotary cutter, this little tiny one, and it just goes kind of right in there, and I maneuver upward. And I have my buttonhole cut open. So that's it.